In a world where battles rage, not only between nations, but within our very minds, what wisdom could a silent monk offer in the face of violence? The Buddha never led armies or drew swords, yet his teachings have disarmed hatred for over 2,000 years. What if true victory lies not in conquest, but in compassion? What if the deepest peace begins where anger ends? Welcome to Trandy Wisdom, where every story is a compelling truth. Buddha's thoughts on war. Rooted in the canon. In Buddhism, war is not merely a physical conflict. It is a manifestation of ignorance, avijja, craving, tanha, and hatred, dosa, the very roots of suffering. The Buddha never endorsed violence or war. Instead, he taught the path of compassion, insight, and liberation from the cycle of retaliation. Below are some key teachings from the Buddha on war and violence, with verified sources from the Pali Canon. 1. Hatred is never appeased by hatred. In the early hours of morning, when the world still breathes in silence and the mist clings to the leaves like unspoken memories, there is a teaching that echoes through time, softly but unwaveringly. Hatred is never appeased by hatred. It is only appeased by love. This is an eternal truth. These words do not belong to an age, a country, or a doctrine. They belong to the human heart. This teaching, nestled in the ancient verses of the Dhammapada, is not a metaphor, not an abstraction. It is a path walked by those who have seen with clarity the cost of retaliation, the weight of vengeance, and the illusion of justice born from anger. In a world that often demands retribution, this truth is radical. It does not promise victory in the worldly sense. It does not offer the sweet burn of revenge. Instead, it invites us into the quiet strength of a heart that no longer seeks to conquer, but to understand. What does it mean to not return hatred with hatred? It means stepping out of the habitual cycle of reaction. It means when someone throws a stone, you do not throw one back. You do not pretend you were not hurt, but you choose not to pass the wound onward. It is important to pause here, to breathe with this truth. The Buddha never asked us to pretend that we are not angry, that we are not afraid. He invited us to look deeply into those feelings. Anger is not an enemy. It is a teacher. When it rises, it tells us something has been violated. Something matters to us. But if we do not look into it with mindfulness, it will take control. It will speak through us, act through us, harm others and ourselves in the process. The Buddha's way is not suppression. It is transformation. In the Samyutta Nikaya, a disciple once asked the Blessed One, "What should one do when attacked by others with harsh words?" The Buddha replied, "When others address you with harsh speech, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected. We shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate and friendly, with a mind full of loving kindness." This isn't passive submission. This is the courage of non-hatred. But to live this way requires training. It is not merely an ethical choice. It is a daily practice. One begins by observing their own reactions, the tightening of the chest, the rush of thought when insulted. One learns to sit with that storm without feeding it. Hatred is like a fire. When fed with more hatred, it grows wild. But when surrounded with spaciousness, with breath, with compassion, it slowly loses fuel. The fire of hatred does not die because it was extinguished with force. It dies because it is no longer fed. We see this truth in the natural world. When a river floods, it does not resist the mountains. It flows around them, shaping the earth, not with violence, but with persistent gentleness. In the same way, the practice of loving kindness, metta, reshapes the hardened landscapes of conflict and fear. In Karaniya, Metta Sutta, the Buddha gives one of the clearest maps for this transformation. Let one not deceive another. nor despise any person whatsoever, in any place. Let one not wish any harm upon another, even in their mind. He urges us to cultivate a boundless heart, one that extends beyond the friend, beyond the enemy, beyond even the idea of self and other. But love in the face of hatred is not sentimental. It is not blind. It sees clearly the roots of suffering in both victim and perpetrator. It knows that hatred is a symptom of inner torment. It dares to stand in the presence of aggression without becoming aggressive. Some may say this way is unrealistic, especially in times of war or political injustice. But the Buddha never promised ease. He promised liberation. And liberation is not the same as comfort. It means the freedom to no longer be ruled by anger. Even when the world is burning, the history of humankind is littered with the cost of retaliatory violence. Kingdoms built on vengeance have crumbled. Families torn apart by grudges leave only silence. The Buddha saw this clearly. He lived in a time of tribal warfare, of caste violence, of betrayal. Yet he chose a different way. Not because it was easy, but because it was the only way that led beyond the cycle of suffering, samsara. When we are hurt, our instinct may be to build walls, to strike back, to assert our story as the only truth. But compassion asks, can you hold your pain without weaponizing it? Can you touch your wound and not turn it into a sword? This is not a question of what others deserve. It is a question of what you wish to become. The Buddha did not give us commandments. He gave us invitations. He placed before us a mirror, and in it, we see our tendencies toward fear, toward judgment, toward vengeance. Then, softly, he said, there is another way. To practice non-hatred is to become a refuge, not only for others, but for yourself. It is to walk in a world of conflict with the heart of peace, not because you have no enemies, but because you no longer create them. When we realize that hatred cannot be appeased by hatred, something shifts. We stop feeding the fires that burn our own homes. We stop rehearsing pain. We begin the slow, sacred work of healing, not only for ourselves, but for the world, and perhaps, in some quiet way. That is how peace begins, not with treaties, not with grand gestures, but with one person choosing not to hate back. 2. Victory breeds hatred. The defeated live in pain, in the stillness after the clash of weapons. After the banners fall and the shouting fades, there lingers a silence, not peace, but the absence of noise, a vacuum filled with smoke, loss, and unspoken grief. In that silence, one ancient voice speaks what most are unwilling to hear. Victory breeds hatred. The defeated live in pain. The peaceful dwell in equanimity, having given up both victory and defeat. This teaching is not carved into stone monuments or etched into war memorials. It is inscribed instead on the soft surface of the heart, where it must be read slowly, meditatively, with the breath. These words come from the Dhammapada, and they are not a political statement. They are an observation of the inner landscape of human suffering. When the Buddha offered this verse, he did so with the eyes of one who had looked deeply into the workings of the mind. He had seen the victors, flushed with triumph, but inwardly restless, caught in the illusion of superiority. He had seen the defeated, nursing wounds that festered not only in the body but in the mind. Wounds that, in time, would become seeds of retaliation. Victory, in the worldly sense, is often worshipped. Statues are built, songs are sung, but hidden beneath that glory is a tremble, a shadow, the desire to protect what has been won, the fear of losing it, the expectation of revenge. Victory becomes a prison guarded by pride. The Buddha pointed not to the futility of effort, but to the suffering created by attachment to outcome. When winning becomes identity, then losing becomes annihilation. The mind swings like a pendulum, Between elation and despair, we become captives of conditions, but the one who abandons both, the need to win and the fear of loss, tastes a deeper freedom. This is the heart of equanimity. Upekkha. It does not mean indifference. It means standing in the storm, with a mind like the sky, vast, open, undisturbed. The battlefield does not only exist in nations or politics, it exists in our homes, our relationships, our thoughts. How often do we argue not to understand, but to win? How often do we defend our views as if they were territory, and react to disagreement as if it were war? In Majjhima Nikaya 28, the Buddha taught, "Even though others speak ill of me, I do not become angry. Even though they strike me, I do not retaliate." These were not the words of weakness, but of immense inner strength. To walk away from victory is not to lose. It is to rise above the battlefield. There is a story of a monk insulted by a soldier. The monk did not react, only smiled with kindness. The soldier demanded, "Why don't you fight back?" The monk replied, "If someone offers you a gift and you do not accept it, to whom does it belong?" The soldier was silenced. The monk had won, not the argument, but the freedom from needing to win. This is the paradox of the Dharma. What the world calls weakness is often the doorway to true strength. Letting go of the need to win is not defeat. It is liberation. You stop carrying the weight of proving yourself. You become light like a leaf in the wind. Flexible, free. Initivutaka 27. The Buddha said, "People indulge in conflict because of attachment to views. But when one sees the truth clearly, all conflict ceases." The cause of war, whether inner or outer, is the same. Clinging, the antidote, is also the same. Understanding. The path of peace is not paved with conquests. It is walked one mindful step at a time. You begin by watching the small wars, the irritation with a colleague, the silent treatment toward a loved one, the urge to win in conversations. You do not shame these impulses. You simply see them, with clarity, with kindness, slowly. The need to win softens. The heart grows spacious. You discover the joy of being, rather than becoming, of listening, rather than proving. You stop trying to win people over and start being present with them. The teachings do not ask us to abandon action or stand by in the face of harm. They ask us to act from a different place, from stillness, not reactivity, from love, not ego. Even the warrior must know the battlefield of the mind. To embrace this truth is to lay down the sword we carry in our speech, our posture, our tone, not because the world is peaceful, but because we no longer contribute to its chaos. We become islands of calm, and from these islands, the ocean slowly changes. In the end, we are not remembered for how many arguments we won, but for how deeply we loved, not for the battles we fought, but for the peace we carried. The Buddha did not glorify peace as a concept. He lived it as a practice. And so, when the next conflict arises, whether in your household, your heart, or your nation, pause, breathe, ask not, "How can I win?" Ask instead, "What can I let go of, so that I may be free?" Because victory breeds hatred. The defeated suffer, but those who surrender the need to conquer, those who give up both throne and battlefield, they alone find the path that leads out of suffering. They are the quiet victors, the invisible revolutionaries, the ones who win nothing, yet lose nothing. And in that nothingness, they discover the profound peace that neither victory nor defeat can offer. 3. All beings fear death. All beings love life. There is a moment, just before the sun lifts above the horizon, when even the wildest animals stand still. The forest is quiet, not because nothing stirs, but because everything listens. In that silence, One ancient truth pulses through the breath of all living things. All beings fear death. All beings love life. These are not just poetic words. They are a mirror held up to the heart. They remind us that behind every face, whether animal or human, stranger or enemy, there is the same trembling instinct to survive, to feel safe, to continue existing. The Buddha did not arrive at this insight through abstraction. He saw it through deep observation, through countless encounters with people from every walk of life: merchants, farmers, kings, warriors, beggars. What he saw again and again was the same longing to be free from suffering, to be protected from death. But this truth is not only found in Scripture, it is found in the eyes of a mother shielding her child from harm, in the wings of a bird fleeing the hunter's arrow, in the breath of a soldier who, despite his armor, still fears the blade. To awaken to this truth is to touch the foundation of compassion. When the Buddha said, "Just as you fear death, so do all others," he wasn't giving a command. He was offering a shift in perception, an invitation to step beyond the narrow confines of the self and feel the heartbeat of another. This is the ground of karuna, compassion. It does not arise from theory. It arises from the lived experience of knowing, from within, what fear feels like, from having felt the tight grip in the chest, the cold silence of uncertainty, the ache of wanting to live. In Sutta Nipata 1:8, the discourse on loving kindness, the Buddha taught, just as a mother would protect her only child with her own life, even so, let one cultivate a boundless love toward all beings. This is not sentimentality. It is a radical way of living, to see others not as ideas or roles, but as breathing beings, tender and vulnerable like ourselves. And yet, how often do we forget? We shout at the driver who cuts us off in traffic. We curse the insect that lands on our skin. We harden our hearts against those who oppose us. But each of them, every one, wants to live. Each of them carries within their small body or vast opinions the same trembling flame of life. When we forget this, we lose ourselves, not just in anger, but in disconnection. But when we remember, even for a breath, that the other person, the animal, the tree, desires safety and continuity, something shifts. We no longer walk through the world like conquerors. We begin to tread more lightly, with care. In Anguttara Nikaya 5:161, the Buddha emphasized 5 contemplations for daily reflection. Among them is the contemplation that I am subject to death. I have not gone beyond death. This is not meant to instill fear. It is meant to wake us up, to recognize that the life we cling to is fleeting, precious, and shared. Because death is not just the end of the body, it is the loss of possibility, the silencing of a song before it has finished. And life, with all its joys and difficulties, is a chance to grow in awareness, in kindness, in liberation. To see this clearly is to become gentle. The sage becomes gentle not because he is weak, but because he sees deeply. He sees the fragility beneath the armor of kings. He sees the wound beneath the anger of enemies. He sees that all beings, no matter how loud, cruel, or confused, are, at their core, afraid of dying and longing to live. This is why the practice of mindfulness is not merely personal. It is deeply relational. When we breathe in awareness, we begin to see the suffering of others with new eyes. We do not dismiss it. We do not compete with it. We make space for it. This space is not passive. It can protect. It can speak. But it doesn't need to dehumanize. Even in resistance, it holds the truth. The one who harms also fears harm. The one who kills does not escape death. That is why the path the Buddha offered was not one of retreat from the world, but of deeper engagement, with the eyes of wisdom and the heart of compassion. To walk this path is to move slowly enough to feel the heartbeat of the earth beneath your feet, to meet a child's gaze without needing to fix them, to see the fluttering of a bird, not as decoration, but as a life with its own purpose. When we see in this way, we understand why the Buddha called hatred a form of ignorance, for when we hate, we fail to see. We fail to see that the person we hurt carries the same fear we do. We fail to see that life is not me against you, but a vast ocean of beings, all trying to stay afloat. This realization does not make us passive. It makes us careful. It does not take away our power. It reveals our responsibility. So, when conflict arises, when you feel the heat of rage or the cold distance of indifference, pause, return to the breath. Ask yourself, does this being not also want to live? Is this not also a fragile life, like mine? The answer is always yes, and in that yes, the wall between self and other begins to dissolve. What remains is not just empathy, it is understanding. And from understanding, love is born. A love that does not cling. A love that does not need agreement. A love that simply says, because I know what it is to suffer, I will not cause you to suffer. This is the teaching. Simple, profound, unshakable. All beings fear death. All beings love life. May we live with that truth, carved gently into every step. 4. The Buddha intervened to prevent war between clans. In a valley cupped between low hills and fields of grain, two rivers once met, one of water and one of blood. But before the blood could be spilled, a single man walked alone beneath the morning sun, barefoot, robe flowing, silent as the wind. He came not with weapons, but with presence. He came not to conquer, but to remind. This was the day the Buddha stood between two armies. The river was called Rohini, a narrow ribbon of life that had, for years, nourished both the Sakyas and the Kolyas, two neighboring clans, proud and bound by ancestral ties. When the water ran low during a drought, fear settled in like dust. Accusations followed. Irrigation channels were blocked. Insults were traded. And soon, soldiers lined up beneath flags bearing their lineage, ready to fight not for principle, but for water. It was a familiar pattern, a precious resource, a perceived threat. Lines drawn, faces hardened, weapons raised. But before the first strike, the Buddha appeared. He walked onto the battlefield without an army, no shield, no rank, no decree, only his deep silence, only the clarity of one who has ceased to see others as enemies. He asked a simple question: what is more valuable, water or human life? The question hung in the air like incense, curling into the space where anger had been. At first, no one answered, not because they didn't know, but because they had forgotten. And in that forgetting, they had been willing to kill. The Buddha did not accuse. He did not shame. He only reminded them of what they already knew, but had buried under pride and fear. He led them back to the river, not to take more water, but to see its reflection, to see themselves in it. This moment, simple in its form, profound in its impact, is a living example of engaged compassion. It is not enough to withdraw into inner peace while the world burns. The path of awakening is not an escape from life's complexity. It is the art of bringing stillness into its storms. In Anguttara Nikaya 4:256, the Buddhist teaches, one who conquers through hatred is not a true conqueror. Only he who conquers himself, his anger, his pride, is the victor. In this ancient lesson, the Buddha was not simply preventing bloodshed. He was preventing the kind of inner violence that festers and poisons generation after generation. War is never born on the battlefield. It is born in the mind. It is born when we draw a line and say, "This is mine." when we forget the shared nature of suffering, when we see another's thirst as a threat to our own. To intervene in war does not always mean disarming soldiers. Sometimes it means disarming the idea of separation. The Buddha did not convince them through argument. He offered them a mirror, and that mirror revealed not the enemy, but themselves, their humanity, their fear, their longing for safety. In Majjhima Nikaya 21, he tells of the quail who flees to the safe ground and is protected. But when she strays from her natural domain, she is vulnerable. The same applies to the human mind. When we leave the ground of mindfulness and wander into the terrain of delusions and division, we are easily captured by conflict. What the Buddha brought that day was not doctrine, it was awareness, a return to the body, a return to the breath, a return to the truth that life is fragile, shared, and fleeting. Imagine the stillness between two armies, spears raised, hearts pounding, and a single man, seated beneath a tree, not speaking of strategy or punishment, but of compassion. Imagine if the generals of the world, before every battle, were asked, what is more important, this piece of land, or the children who will weep if you take it? This story of the Rohini River does not live in the past. It is a parable for now, because rivers still dry, resources still dwindle, and pride still blinds us to the cost of war. We may not be clan leaders or kings, but we each have a battlefield. It arises in family disputes, in political debates, in daily traffic, in the friction between colleagues, and we can either escalate or pause. We can either defend our territory or dissolve it. When we see conflict arising, the question remains the same. What is more valuable, being right or being kind? This doesn't mean we abandon justice. The Buddha did not ask the Sakyas and Kolyas to ignore their needs. He asked them to remember that no need justifies cruelty, that any solution severed from compassion will not endure. The river eventually flowed again, but more importantly, so did understanding. The weapons were lowered, not because they were outmatched, but because they were outgrown. This is the power of mindful presence. It does not force change, it invites it. It does not conquer, it transforms. When we remember that all beings seek the same peace, the same water, the same dignity, then war begins to feel like a strange forgetting, and peace, not as a treaty or an end, but as a practice, becomes possible. The Buddha's intervention was not a miracle. It was mindfulness embodied. It was what happens when one person dares to sit in the middle of rage with an unshaken heart, not above it, not away from it, but within it, and perhaps the river itself, quiet now, still carries that memory, that once, in a time of heat and dust, a man reminded two clans that they shared the same water, not just from the earth, but from the heart. 5. Let one not strike another, not even with words. There are wounds we do not see, wounds that do not bleed but echo. They hide beneath laughter, behind silence, within eyes that turn away when no one is looking. These are the wounds caused not by weapons, but by words. A single sentence, spoken in anger or pride, can slice deeper than a blade. Words have no mass, but they carry weight. They leave no scars, yet shape the architecture of a life. The Buddha understood this long before psychology named the nervous system. He saw clearly how words rippled through body and mind, how they can either nurture or destroy. In the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the Buddha offered a map for living with compassion. Among its instructions was a spiritual yet radical call. Let one not strike another, not even with words. In this phrase, he reveals something often overlooked in the pursuit of spiritual practice, that violence does not begin in fists, it begins in the tongue, and before that, in thought. We strike with judgment, with sarcasm, with dismissal. We strike with the tone we use, the silence we impose, the names we call. Sometimes, we strike simply by the absence of kindness when it is most needed. These are the invisible blows we carry in our daily lives. In the forest, the wind bends the bamboo, but never breaks it. The trees whisper without shouting. The rivers carve stone through patience, not force. Nature teaches a different way, one of soft power, not harsh assertion. And yet, humans speak as if language were a weapon to be sharpened in every debate. The Buddha's path is not the path of suppression. He never asked us to pretend anger does not arise. Instead, he asked us to recognize it, breathe with it, and transform it before it hardens into words. In Dhammapada, verse 133, he teaches, "Do not speak harshly to anyone. Those thus spoken to will answer back. Angry speech is painful. Blows for blows will touch you." The call is not simply to avoid shouting or insults. It is a call to speak from a place of clarity, rooted in compassion, a call to become aware that our speech is not separate from our inner state. When the mind is clouded, the tongue becomes a knife. When the mind is calm, the tongue becomes a balm. In Majjhima Nikaya 58, the Buddha described the qualities of skillful speech. It must be true, spoken at the right time, spoken gently, and beneficial. This is not easy, but it is essential, because the words we choose are the seeds we plant in the soil of others' hearts. If we plant fear, we harvest distance. If we plant love, we invite connection. The battlefield of daily life is not marked by flags. It is in the kitchen, between spouses, in the office, between colleagues, in classrooms, among children. And the war is often waged not with bullets, but with tone. So, what does it mean to live this teaching? It means pausing before you speak, especially when emotion rises. It means asking yourself, is this necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? It means choosing stillness over winning, understanding over being right. It means realizing that the strength of your practice is revealed not in meditation halls, but in conversations that hurt. The Buddha often reminded his disciples to see everyone as a mother, a father, a sibling, a child, because when you remember that the person in front of you suffers just like you, it becomes harder to lash out. When you realize that their unkindness is often rooted in pain, not evil, your words soften, your heart widens. In Itivuttaka 27, he said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but by love alone." This is not sentimental. It is spiritual realism, because when you return anger with anger, you become its servant. But when you respond with patience, you become its master. Letting go of violent speech does not mean becoming silent or weak. It means becoming precise, mindful, compassionate. It means learning to say hard truths with softness, to disagree without degrading, to assert without attacking. The deeper you go into this practice, the more you notice how subtle violence can be. A sigh, an eye roll, a joke that cuts, passive aggression. The Buddha invites us to turn inward, not to judge ourselves, but to become intimate with the energies we release into the world. Because everything we say echoes. It touches someone. It lingers. Even the absence of a kind word, in a moment of need, can be a kind of striking. And so, we practice, not to become perfect, but to become aware. We breathe before we speak. We listen with our full presence. We notice when our voice trembles, when our words come from the old wound rather than the present moment. We practice not for others alone, but for ourselves, because every word of kindness we speak waters the seeds of peace within us. Every time we hold back a harsh reply, we liberate ourselves from the cycle of harm. To not strike even with words is to live as if the world were sacred, as if each being were a fragile lotus floating in a storm. It is to become a gentle rain in a time of fire. And that is the way of the Bodhisattva, not one who saves the world through force, but who saves it one breath, one word, one silence at a time. So speak as if your words were leaves falling into the stream of someone's heart. Speak of as if your voice could heal, because it can. And when you forget, begin again. Inhale, exhale, begin again. In the eyes of the Buddha, war is not just a tragedy of the world. It is a sign of spiritual failure. It arises when minds are ruled by delusion, anger, and fear. The true battlefield is within. The only path to peace is the path of understanding, mindfulness, and boundless compassion.